Hey everyone, this is going to be a video response to Lindybeige's videos entitled The Katana and Katanas. There was some good information out of those videos, however there was also a lot of misinformation that I will clear up right now. Now keep in mind for this video that I am not a katana cultist, meaning I am not someone who thinks that the Japanese sword is the only good sword. I'm also a fan of rapiers, as you can see, and I did just carve this scabbard for this sword. I am not done with it yet, but I will be doing a video showing this scabbard when it is done. I also have training in Korean swordsmanship, and I will be getting a long sword soon enough. I've also done projects like this one right here, where I take a Japanese sword and I put a Bowie knife guard on it, and I come up with a differently shaped ska. So as you can see, I am not just a fan of Japanese swords, but I am a fan of swords of all kinds of cultures. So now that we have that clear, let's get started. This here is the Conway Tori Iaido, and this will be our benchmark sword. Now, with all these swords, we're not going to be focusing on different colors on the sword, or different things like rattan wrapping on saya or wire wrapping or any of those other things. We are solely going to focus on blade shape and dimensions of the swords. So this sword here has a 28-inch blade and a 10.5-inch ska. And the curve is not very deep. This is your typical type of katana. This blade is shinogi zukuri, which means, as you can see right here, there is this line called the yokote, which divides the kisaki from the rest of the blade. This sword here also has a bohi, which is a fuller. Now that we have gone on this sword, we're going to go on to the next one. Now, another thing to keep in mind before I show you this sword right here is that all my swords pretty much are historical lengths that I have researched. I do a lot of research on this, and I have done different blade lengths from different swords that I have read about, and different antique swords that I have seen online. Now this one here is my custom Ryan sword Iaido, and you'll notice right away one difference is that this sword has much more curvature to it. Also, another thing to take note of is the fact that the blade on this one is longer. This is a 31-inch blade with a 14-inch ska. So the blade on this one is 3 inches longer than the first one, and the ska is 3.5 inches longer. Another interesting thing to take note of is the fact that this one here has what's called an O kisaki. So the kisaki on this one is very long. O means great, long, things like that. So this is a 3-inch kisaki. And just to show you for comparison, this was the first one I showed you, and the kisaki is less than 2 inches long on this one. The reason why this sword here is so curved is because this here is modeled after swords that were originally tachi, but remounted into katana. The way that you can tell the difference between a katana and a tachi is by the signature, typically. The signature is on the takago, which is the tang, and the tang is part of the sword. It's basically a steel that goes into the handle that the ska attaches to, the ska being the handle. On a katana, they are on this side right here, the omote side, because when the sword is worn, it's still facing outward. On a tachi, it's on this side, because then, once again, when it's being worn, edge down, it's still facing outward. Some katana did have more curvature when the transition from tachi to katana took place, and that's what the sword here was supposed to be showing. Some swords did have more curvature than a typical katana, and that is what this sword here was basically reflecting. Now this one here is next. This is the Conway Shelburne Raptor katana. The first thing you will notice that is a huge difference between the two is that this one here is what is called shobuzukuri. Shobuzukuri does not have the yokote right here that separates the kisaki from the rest of the blade. This here is an okisaki, so this is a long kisaki. And you will also notice that this one here does not have a bohi, the fuller, the groove that was running down here on the previous two. This one doesn't have that. And the reason that this one doesn't have that is, variance in blades. There were a lot of different blade shapes, blade styles, blade lengths, all kinds of things. This blade shape is better for penetrating armor, specifically leather armor, but I suspect that this would also fare better at penetrating other kinds of armor than the typical shinogi zukuri blade would do. This next one here is a nodachi, and the reason why I'm showing this is because historically, katana did not always refer to a single blade length. It wasn't until about the 3rd Tokugawa shogun that actually referred to a specific blade length. Because before the 3rd Tokugawa shogun, a daisho, meaning the two swords that a samurai would wear, typically nowadays we see in movies like Katana and Wakizashi or Katana and Tanto, the daisho could consist of any two swords in which one was longer than the other. So that means technically you could have a nodachi and a katana and it is a daisho. One of the 47 ronin actually had, for his daisho, his katana had a 33.5-inch blade and his wakizashi had a 28-inch blade. So in reality, he actually carried two katanas. Well, one katana and one really big katana. But this blade shape here was sometimes found on Japanese swords as well. This blade shape is called unokubizukuri, and as you will notice, the blade thins right here. It thins, and then it regains thickness. So it is the same thickness as the other two from here to here, but then from here on up, it's thinned down, and then it goes back to normal thickness. So from here to here, it's thinner. The reason being is that for one, lightens the sword, much like the bohi does, but this does it even more so. And this here is better at cutting. You will also notice that the sword has different styles of bohi. The bohi that's on the other two, right down here, only goes from here to here, and then it has a bohi running along the shinogi. And once again, that's just because different blades for different purposes. Not all Japanese swords had the same blade shape. Now this one here is shinogi zukuri. Now this one here has horimono, which is the blade carving from here to here. And it has a bohi, but the bohi, as you will notice, does not go down the entire length of the blade. The bohi is only going from here down to here, and then from here to here is the horimono. So once again, that's showing a different style of bohi. The other thing that Lindybeige said was that the katana is not really suited for one-handed use. I would definitely disagree with that, as would some samurai who were known for using the sword with one hand, such as Miyamoto Musashi. Miyamoto Musashi was known for using two swords, a katana and a wakizashi, at the same time. Swords of this general blade size were also known for being used from horseback in Japan. So the katana and the tachi could both be used from horseback. Especially if it was a katana with more of a deeper curve, it could be used from horseback. And of course that would be used one-handed then in that case. And for use from horseback, from what I have read, it was not uncommon for a samurai to hold the middle of the ska rather than all the way up here. Now, the other thing was that Lindybeige said that these swords are not very good for armor piercing. Really, no sword is really the best for armor piercing. Typically, there are some exceptions. However, the katana can be used against armor, and it can be used quite effectively against armor. And the way comes from just the way that you use the sword. I study Muso Jikuden Shinryu. In Muso Jikuden Shinryu, we do not throw a kesa, which is the downward angled cut, at this angle. The reason being is because, as you can see, the blade is contacting at the shoulder. In armor, that place will be protected, so there would be no point in cutting there. Instead, we cut, and I have to be careful of my sealing, right for the neck. So, because once again, that's the gap in the armor, right there. But, also, that there could be more deadly than hitting the shoulder. Also, for stabs, you can stab with a Japanese sword quite effectively, contrary to popular belief. Now, if you are stabbing like this, then yes, this will not stab as well, because you are trying to move in a straight motion with a curved blade. It's not going to work very well. However, if you stab in an arc, as you can see, then it's not going to be as big a deal. And in fact, then the curve could actually be an advantage, because if you are fighting someone in armor and they have a throat guard, you can go under the throat guard and right into the throat. Also, if you just got done doing a nukatsuke, with the curve, when you go to stab, it's going to once again follow the contours of the body more. And depending on how you are using the sword, there are even times that you can use the curve to go in an angle into, say, maybe the side right there, or maybe into the leg. And there are other ways that the kisaki can be used and that you can stab with a sword. Also, depending on the strategy of your style, you can cut straight down as the opponent is cutting, so your sword will displace theirs, turn the sword, which then moves their sword out of the way, and then when you stab, the sword will be further away from you. Now, it is also important to keep in mind that just because a blade is thick does not mean that it is bad at penetrating armor. There were in Japan many blades that were, sometimes relatively thick for penetrating armor, such as the Yoroi Doshi, which is a tanto that is a little bit thicker so that you can pierce armor with it and it won't bend as easily. Japanese swords were known to pierce armor periodically. There was cases of a sword actually stabbing into the chest. There were cases of it actually cutting into the kote and cutting through the kote, actually. Oh, that wasn't as common, and the swords did get damaged from it. There was a sword that did cut through a kote, and it actually got called kotegiri because of it. However, the sword did not escape unscathed from it. There was another one called kabuto giri. Kabuto, helmet, giri, cut. It cut through a helmet. Once again, it didn't escape unscathed, but it did cut through armor. And the leather parts of the helmet right here were typically the weaker parts to cut for. The armpits were also a place to stab for because of the fact that they were open, and there were other places that you could cut or stab for in armor. In the style I study, Musojikura Nishinru, when we do our nukatsuke, we are actually quite often cutting for the eyes. Reason being is because we're trying to actually go into a little gap that was in the helmet right at the eyes. And there are some surviving helmets that show little nicks right at the eyes of the helmet, so apparently there were samurai actually going for those cuts. Now, in regard to length, it is important to keep in mind that swords came in varying different sizes. For example, with the 47 Ronin, their blade lengths were actually documented before they died. And when they did document the sword lengths, there were swords as short as 22 inches on katanas, and there was one that was 3 shaku long. So it was actually a little bit longer than this. 3 shaku is 3 feet. This here is a 35-inch blade. And for shoto, which is the short sword, the wakizashi or the tanto, once again, there were many varying blade lengths. As short as under 12 inches and as long as 28 inches. Unfortunately, only 33 out of the 47 Ronin's blade lengths were actually documented, but this still gives us an idea of the different blade lengths that were used. So then, as you will see, there were many different blade lengths, and they were not all the same. There were many different variants in blade shapes, blade lengths, and blade styles, and this is only a few of the blade shapes that I mentioned. There are, many more. To say that all katana are pretty much the same would be to say that all long swords are pretty much the same, or all of any sword that has variants. They're not the same. So, I hope this was helpful and informative. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya!